Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and try to get started with the afternoon. One quick thing I need to mention. Need to ding.
Am I on? I can't see.
If I could ask everybody to log out of the Wi-Fi that has logged in, we're losing our live stream connection, and St. Leo's thought it was maybe because there's too many people logged in. So I apologize, but if you could log out, it's going to help us with live streaming. And I think Jane is ready.
All right. It's really because I put a jammer on it and said, you know, we don't really need to have everybody live stream. They should be here and have fun with us, right? Anyway, welcome back. Thanks to those of you who are able to stay for the afternoon. I want to change the focus, but before I do that, any other questions about board operations, structure that we talked about this morning, that maybe you've thought of a question over lunch that you need to get answered or get opinions on? Yes. So what are my thoughts on having a married couple both be members of the parish council? Pros and cons. Pros could be that they both bring something radically different to the council, and their skills are different, their interests are different, and so it can be really helpful. A couple of cons are the domination of having one household who can form a sort of a voting block, as well as taking up a couple of spaces instead of one space from one particular household in the parish. Generally, it wouldn't be my choice. There are opportunities to succeed each other, perhaps, if you feel like that household is really, valuable, has a lot to offer.
Have some favorite ideas, examples of board recognition.
In terms of when they're leaving the board, just say thank you. Yeah, I mentioned the board certificate. I think if there's something that is iconic about your particular institution or something that you do, I think that can be a nice thing to do. If since you're in schools, for instance, one of the things that can be nice is to have students do something that you can give board members, whether it's artwork or whether it's come and do a concert or something in their honor. I mean, I think the more you can tie it to your institution and the less it's just a generic certificate or tchotchke, the better off I think you are. I don't think most board members need a lot of stuff, but they do like to be appreciated. So I think that's something that's worth spending some time thinking about. And the more you can personalize any kind of recognition to your institution, I think the better off you are, without a doubt.
Do you have suggestions for when you have volunteers for a board, et cetera, and if we do that evaluation, what happens the rest of the year when you really like people to self-evaluate and say, please read the stuff in advance, or whatever the case might be?
So the question is about board evaluation.
How do you do that in an annual thing, help people realize they need to be prepared?
Well, I think that is the purpose of the annual evaluation. And so when you ask them to evaluate themselves annually, I recommend that you give the results back to the board so that they see how they've evaluated themselves. And if the evaluation says we need to read our materials more, then I think that's something that whoever the chair of the group is can say, as we noted in our evaluation, we probably aren't very good at this, so I'll remind you to read your materials. Or, we noted that our July meeting is really hard for people to come to and nobody cares for that. What shall we do about rearranging it? Or, using those evaluations then to change behavior is really the whole idea of having them, is not just to say you get a grade, but to use them as a platform for action for the future on how do we get better. Because you hope you're always trying to get better at what you do, whether it's coming to professional development or looking at how you do business and then reworking it so that you get better at it. I think that's the the purpose of having those is not just to give the board a grade, but to help us get better at what we do. Any other questions? All right. Our topic was called Workshop on the Board and Engagement. And so I want to talk a little bit about what board members can do outside of meetings to help you become a better institution, particularly in the area of advancement, but not just limited to that. So we want to keep the board motivated and inspire them to action, obviously both in our meetings and in what they're doing for us. So this, as I mentioned, the training and the orientation, but that also talks about what they can do outside of board meetings as well, how they can help us with recruitment or advancement or image or marketing or anything that we might be working on. So some of that you can do through your institutional efforts of engaging people in ways beyond the board. Some of it you're going to do through board committees and the goals that they set for the committees and as ways to engage the board. And sometimes you're just going to work with individual board members to use particular strengths that they might have. So, you know, as an example, you might have a board member who has ties to local media, and you ask them to help you get features about your institution in the news. I've got one client who's got a board member whose sister is one of the local news anchors in their area. And so she's able to get her sister to send reporters their way to tell good stories about their institution that they might not otherwise get noticed because they wouldn't be able to have the connection. So using your board members to help you individually with things can be a real good way to do it. I want to talk a little bit about giving, give you some background, and then talk about how you can engage the board and others in your giving process. So one of the questions is to think about who gives and why. So these are all figures from Giving USA, which is a publication that is compiled about charitable giving in the United States every year. The latest figures available are for 2016. They don't usually come out with new numbers until about May. And so these are the 2016 numbers. But I thought it might be interesting for you to see that individuals give 72% of the money. Foundations give 15%, corporations 5%, and bequests make up 8% of charitable giving. So there's several interesting lessons here to be learned, I think. One is you will probably hear a lot from people about what are you doing to get corporations and foundations to support your institution? And that's a great question, but it's maybe not always the right question. Usually the right question is, what are we doing to get individuals to support our institution? Because that's where the money is. And if you add up the 72% from individuals and the 8% from bequests, because guess what? Only people leave bequests. Then you can also add in perhaps as much as 5% from the foundations, because many of those are personal or family foundations. And the way to influence the gift from those foundations is to influence the individual. So you're somewhere in the 80 to 85% of the money that's given to charities every year is given by individuals. And if you look at small institutions, you're probably going to find that it's 94 to 98% of the money is going to come from individuals. So you'll hear a lot from folks about, we need to get more money from corporations, we need to get more money from foundations. And I'm here to tell you that that's okay to think about, but the likelihood is that the majority of the money is going to come from individuals. And when you add in the religious factor to it as well, a lot of corporations will not give to faith-based institutions. There are even some foundations that do not want to give to a religiously affiliated organization. So individuals is where you need to be thinking about your emphasis, which works great with board members because they're individuals. And those are the kind of people that they might be able to know. The other interesting thing is, where does the money go? And this is, as you may know, the definition of charity is nonprofit. And so this is where the money goes by percentage. Education gets about 15%, religion gets 32%. This is one of the rare audiences that I'm with where the people actually relate to the biggest piece of the pie. Frequently it's the second biggest, but human services 12%, grant-making foundations get 10%. That's those foundations that then turn around and give money back again. Healthcare, public society benefit, arts, culture, and humanities, international affairs, environment, animals, and then some people make direct contributions to individuals, say for scholarships or other things. So this is where you can see that the money goes in this country, which is really interesting, but also that religious organizations get a large piece of the pie. Educational institutions get also a large piece of the pie. If you're in the arts, culture, and humanities, you've got a tough row to hoe. Not always so easy to get gifts. The other interesting thing is to think about, why do people give? The Bank of America did a survey several years ago of people who are of high net worth and are also philanthropic. And they asked them, why do you give? And so what's interesting is to see what are the reasons they've chosen. The largest reasons are because they think it'll make a difference, personal satisfaction. They always support the same causes, which is interesting, which is like if you get on the list, you've got a pretty good shot at staying on the list. Believe in giving back to the community. Because I'm a board member or volunteer, that's one that always warms my heart. You get people involved and their money follows their heart. And various other ones as you go along. You'll see that receiving a tax benefit is pretty low on the list of why people give. It's not at the top of the list. We often talk about tax deductibility as a major issue, but in reality, that may help on the size of the gift, but it's not necessarily the indicator at all. Yes.
Educating people. Just not pulling up.
I think it's because people give because of emotion, not because of an intrinsic benefit. Generally, I really do think that, because these are people who have plenty. These are the high net worth people. They have access to all kinds of advisors, all kinds of tax folks, and we're talking high net worth. We're not talking about somebody who gives $1,000. We're talking about people who give millions. And this is where they fall, which is so interesting to me. There's another interesting question they ask that's not up here. They ask people, if you stopped giving to an institution, why did you stop? And I'm going to see if you can guess what the number one reason is that they stopped giving. Wasn't asked, no. Didn't get a thank you or recognition, nope. Not connected, that's almost there, not quite. I don't know anybody there anymore. I mean, that honestly was the most awful thing I ever read, because we can fix that. There's absolutely no reason that someone who's a high net worth individual giving you large gifts should ever not know anyone at your organization. I mean, that's crazy. And so I'm going to guess what happened is they either were cultivated solely by the CEO, and the CEO never let anyone else talk to them. And when that person transitioned to retirement or another job, the new CEO didn't immediately connect with that person, and so they don't know anybody. Or they connect with a development officer who got a new job, and nobody else picked it up. And that, I mean, that's shameful, because if people are giving large gifts to your institution and they don't know anybody, that's our fault. That's not their fault. So that was a wide eye-opener to me, because I can see it happen so easily. It's easy to happen, but it's easy to fix too. So the thing to think about when you think about the board and fundraising and getting involved with it, it's not their job to get everyone to engage with the institution. It's to get the people who believe what you believe to engage with the institution. So if you think about your world, whatever it might be, whether it's Elkhorn or whether it's Omaha or whether it's Nebraska or the state, who are your people and who are you trying to get engaged with? You know, if you're a parish in a local community, you're not trying to engage people all over the state to come and be involved with your parish. You're trying to get the people that are in your community to be involved in your parish. If you're an organization that has a national reach, then you might have a different way of being involved with people. And so you're trying to work with the people that have the opportunity to engage with you at whatever your level is. And I think that's what the board has to think about too. A lot of times I see boards who have fairly unrealistic expectations. They know that they have a great organization, but they assume that any foundation in the country would also think it's a great organization and want to make a gift. And the problem is there are many, many great organizations in our country, and they can't give to everybody, so they tend to give to the ones in their neighborhood or the ones they already know. So you have to develop your own connections. You can't just assume that because you're great, someone's going to want to give to you. And a lot of times I think we're a bit naive about that and think because we're great, everyone's going to want to support us. I often talk with institutions and say, now, who are your prospects for your campaign and who do you think would be supportive? And I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, Bill Gates would be great for us. You know, he would really like what we're doing and he has a lot of money. And I will agree that he has a lot of money and he might even like what you're doing. But the likelihood that he's going to give a gift to an institution that he's never heard of is pretty small. And so what I usually say to people is, if you don't know them, then you can't put them on your prospect list. And one time the school said back to me, well, we don't know him, but Melinda gives us money. Can we put them on the prospect list? And I'm like, okay, you can put them on. But most of the time you don't have that kind of relationship with the richest people in the world. You're looking for the people in your world that are affluent and that might be able to help you. The other thing to think about is that giving is really about the donor. It's not about you, your institution. And we often think about it as what are our needs? What is it we are in need of? What will really help us? And let's just get people excited about it. And certainly that's an important piece of this. But the other important part is, what does the donor believe? What are their interests? What are their values? So what you're really looking for is, where's that intersection between what you want to accomplish as an institution and what the donor wants to accomplish with their philanthropy, or what really feeds their soul when they think about making gifts. And so it may be a narrow overlap like this. It may be a much bigger overlap, but it's about what are the donors' needs and how do they interact with your needs and how do they help you accomplish your goals and the donor's goals at the same time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these responsibilities, that how the board fits into the advancement process, along with where the CEO fits, where the advancement team fits, and any other fundraising volunteers. First of all, presidential or CEO responsibilities. You have the responsibility to articulate the compelling vision. So we talked about the board working to create the vision, following the mission, but it's often the job of the CEO to be the one to articulate that vision to the community. And so whether that is through presentations, one-on-one conversations, written material, whether the letters, publications, newsletters, that person should always be able to articulate what is the vision for our future. And I feel like if the CEO is consistent and compelling enough, that it'll be a message that will really begin to resonate with the people who hear it. So an example I'll give you is, I mean, literally over 25 years ago, I went back to work for my alma mater, and we were in a capital campaign, and we were trying to fulfill our vision statement. And to this day, I can still tell you what the vision was for our university that we were trying to become, and that which this campaign was going to help. And that was, we were going to be a top 25 liberal arts college. We're going to be a top seminary in the Episcopal Church, one of the top two, and we wanted to become known as the Episcopal University in this country. So as a result of the campaign, the good news is they accomplished number one, became the top 25 at liberal arts college. I would argue that they accomplished the second one, but there's really no ranking agency, and every other seminary would argue that they didn't. But certainly a good seminary. Completely failed at becoming known as the Episcopal University in this country, because I'm sure if I'd asked you prior to this, what is the Episcopal University, you would have absolutely no idea, because there's only one and nobody knows it. So, but you work toward a vision, and I can still remember it, you know, all these years later. And I think that's a tribute to the fact that it was top of mind the entire 5 years that I worked there. That's what we were working toward. That's what we talked about. That's what the president talked about. That's what the development staff talked about. Is what the board talked about. And I think that kind of articulation of a vision, making it compelling and having everyone really live it, is what makes institutions really successful.
In 25 to 30 on a sliding scale, what's the size of the organization are you talking?
Stewarding a portfolio of major prospects. I don't think the size of the organization is so meaningful there. I think it's the size of the gift potential would change. So if you're Harvard, you're talking about, you know, 500 million to $1 billion prospects. If you're talking about the smallest organization around, you might be talking about $500 to $1,000 prospects. Yeah, I think it's whoever are the most influential donors to your organization. Because one of the things that we've learned is that donors want to know the CEO. And it's partly because, of course, they like to feel important. Who doesn't? But it's also because that's the direction of the institution that they see coming through that person. And they want to feel comfortable that the CEO can make the actual plan happen, and that it's really going to come to fruition and not just be a dream that everybody talks about and never happens. Because if I'm going to put money into an organization, I want to know that you're going to use it well. And I think donors, the more they give, the more they're interested in that. And the contact with the CEO gives them confidence as well as access. So I think that becomes an important piece of it. I think the CEO is the chief fundraiser. That doesn't mean you have to be on every call or that you're the only one who can ask for money. And frankly, if you are the only one who can ask for money, you've got a much bigger problem, because it's too much for one person to do that. You need to have board members and staff members that can help you. But I think when it comes to the really important fundraising, you're going to be on that call. I think that's going to probably be essential. You need to have a really close relationship with the Chief Advancement Officer if you're the CEO, because that's a team that's going to make the difference in the fundraising. But it's also the team that's going to involve board members and other volunteers as you begin to make asks. Bless you. I think the other piece about that portfolio, Mike, that you're talking about, the 25 to 30, is it's not just cultivating people to solicit them, but it's also stewarding them when the gifts are made. You know, making sure that they understand that the gift is making an impact. So I think most institutions are really pretty good at thanking people once a gift is made, particularly a gift of a level that the CEO might be involved in. We're pretty good at writing thank you notes. We're probably pretty good at calling people, or maybe even good at, you know, taking them out to dinner or whatever it might be to say thank you. I think what we're not always as good at is saying thank you again down the road when the gift is really having an impact. So what I find is that we do pretty well, again, with endowment gifts. A lot of people will send out an endowment stewardship letter every year and say, your endowed scholarship is worth X and it's supporting X number of students, and this is wonderful and really appreciate it. But for the people who donated money for a building, how often do we send them a note a year or 3 or 5 years later and say, you know, that building that you helped make happen, it has made such an impact in our program, in our campus, in our life. And we just want to tell you again how much we appreciate it. I think we sometimes forget to do those things that don't have the recurring expenditures out. And so really, as CEO, part of the job is to make sure those real top donors feel appreciated all the time. Maybe not so appreciated that they never need to give a gift again, but definitely appreciated enough that they would want to give a gift again, because I think that is also important. And then I think engaging board members in whatever fundraising campaigns you might have going on, whether it's your annual fund campaign, your capital campaign, endowment campaign, plan giving campaign. If you don't get leadership from the CEO to help the board members engage with you, and frankly, to really connect board members with the process so that they're not out doing things on their own. I mean, everybody needs to be coordinated as you're working with fundraising. We can't have anyone out just randomly asking people for money, as good-hearted as they may be, to do that. So it's up to the CEO often to keep the board members following the process and staying in the game, so to speak, so that they are doing what the whole team is working toward, and not sort of being out randomly asking people for money. I've certainly seen that happen in ways that are uncomfortable for everyone. So what are the advancement responsibilities? Advancement really provides the infrastructure for fundraising. You know, they're the ones that create the plans. We talked about that earlier, that having a long-term plan with for advancement program with a 1-year definitely well-developed plan is really important. And I think that is up to the advancement staff to produce that. It again goes back to the board to endorse it, perhaps to add some recommendations to it, but the advancement staff is the place for having that happen. Excuse me. Typically, the advancement staff will prepare the case for support. We spent some time yesterday at the Archdiocesan office talking about, you know, what is a case for support? And so I just want to be clear that what that means is you're writing out something that explains why someone would want to give a gift to your institution, what that gift would accomplish, how it'll make a difference, and then really implying through the written document how that person will feel good about the gift that they've made. And so I highly recommend that if you don't have one, that you create a case statement for your annual fund. It's not something that has to change every year, but it is something that kind of serves as the white paper, as the basis for all the asks that you're going to make, whether you do it through direct mail or a phone call or a face-to-face visit or social media, email. If you've got that underlying document that shapes how you talk about your needs, how you talk about the impact of your giving, then I think that's going to make a difference. And it typically originates in the advancement office and then can get reviewed by board members, CEO, other folks involved with your organization. But it's a pretty critical document. We often have them for campaigns, for capital or endowment, but we don't as often have them for annual fund. It could be. Oh no, I think the sneezing that was happening over here has been catching. I'm going to have to take a quick break and blow my nose. Sorry. Must be something in the air here. Oh, on the microphone. How exciting. Oh, never done that before. Check that off the bucket list. Whew. Only in Omaha, you know, I get to have all the fun. But I feel better now. The other piece that the advancement office needs to do, and I was sort of alluding to this earlier, is you're really the point people for the coordination of the interactions that you have with prospects. So in advancement, we call that a moves process. And what that means is, how do we move people from just getting acquainted with your organization to wanting to make a major gift. And so it's a continuum of engagement and development of relationship. And so we talk about how do we move people closer and closer to our organization so that they're interested and inspired to make a gift. And so typically that coordination of that process is in the advancement office, but the CEO and board members have a very key role to play in many of those interactions with the key prospects. because many of them are peers. They can get that person's attention. They can engage with that person in a way that a staff person is not always able to do. So that interaction of the advancement person with others to do the moves process is important. But there's also interaction that the advancement person is going to have personally with prospective donors as well. So in a really good program, there's a lot of different touch points with prospective donors so that they have a lot of friends. To go back to my point that you don't just know one person, but you don't have 5 people asking that person for money. You're coordinated, and one person or one team is going to be doing the asking. And it might involve a board member, it might involve the CEO, it might involve the advancement person. I think the other thing that the advancement staff needs to really do is not only to create a plan, but to implement it, and to implement it on a timeline. You know, you have a calendar, you choose to talk about where you're going to, when you're going to do things, how you're going to do things. Doing them on the time that you planned is, I think, so critical, because there are good times to ask for money. There are not so good times for ask for money. There are processes that you want to put in place that culminate in asking for money. And so making sure that the institution stays on that timeline is part of the advancement offices and advancement leaders' responsibility. And then, of course, there's the stewardship process to the people who've made gifts, and also the reporting on progress. It's interesting. We used to have in our business all the time, people did their annual reports. And a lot of what the annual report was really kind of an honor roll of donors, where you listed the people who gave to you and you thanked them, and you noted like maybe their constituency, the size of their gift, various things. And it was not inexpensive, I'll give you that. You publish something like that and you mail it to your whole constituency. It can cost some money. And so as the internet became more ubiquitous, people moved to having their annual reports be online, or perhaps only emailing them out, or many ways to try to save money. Unfortunately, I think what happened with the money saving is that we also missed the interaction with our donors. And so for me, the annual report, while it was nice to honor the donors that gave, it wasn't really for the donors that gave. It was really for the people who didn't give, to see that other people were supporting you and at what level those people were supporting you. So by chopping the list down to only the people who'd given, I think we were almost just wasting our money and not getting it to the right people. Now that it's kind of moved to online, there's a couple of other issues there, and that is people almost never go read it, because you tell them where it is and they don't go. And the only people who are reading it are the people who are looking for prospects for their institution, and they're finding it from your annual report online. I mean, there are literally robots out there combing for annual reports and putting that information together so that they can rate those donors for somebody else. So if you're going to do an annual report and you're going to put it online, by all means, password protect it. But I'm not even sure I would do that. I would go back to thinking about doing it as a publication. If it's useful to do, it's useful to get it in people's hands, whether it becomes a part of a magazine or a newsletter. And I do think it can help you, because it helps people reflect on how much they're giving in relation to what other people are giving, who's giving, and maybe I should be giving. So I think there's still some value in that, and it's a stewardship value. But I understand it's also an economic issue, that it's not a free publication, and getting it to the people who probably most need to see it is a large group of non-donors. And we worry about how much that costs. Of course, that always leads to the other question of how long do you keep mailing to non-donors? And my answer is you keep mailing to them until you stop getting gifts from non-donors. And I've never seen that happen. Anytime you do a mailing, you almost always get something from people who haven't given, if you mail to them, that is. And so how do you know which ones won't give? And I've seen too many really nice planned gifts that came from people who gave nothing before or almost nothing. And so you just don't know who cares about you and chooses to sort of display their caring in a whole different way. It's a conundrum when you think about budget, though, I understand. Any questions so far on what we've been talking about?
So I look at this. CEO, if he's able to coordinate all of this, is staff. And they're busy just to keep all of this. All these boards,
There's no doubt they're busy.
all this stuff. Now,
I got to see where you're going before I say if I agree with you, but yes.
so, you have a recommendation. Because challenge that I see, if you're in a business platform, obviously that CEO, that's his job, that's just what he does. In a church, if the priest is the CEO, and he's trying to do all of these things, then where does that leave his time for his ministry? Which is really ultimately what we help do. So then, is there a platform that essentially works to try to break down that CEO, you know, and there may be people that are put in place that does, so that that's it. I mean, I don't know, I'm just saying.
No, you raise a really good point, because the typical CEO, their job is to be CEO. Their job is not to also have sort of a program job on the side. Whereas with a priest, they've got the running of the parish and the ministry to the parishioners. And I think that's where sometimes you have the parish administrator who would take some of those roles, that a lot of the coordination of boards and committees does not have to be done by the CEO, and frankly isn't done by the CEO in mid to large size nonprofits anyway. It's going to be designated to some administrator, and it certainly could be. I think, again, it's going to depend on how much the parish is able to have other staff that can help. I mean, the smaller the organization, the more hats everybody's going to wear. There's just no doubt about that. Figuring out what works for the person's talents is the other issue, is that some of us are much better at one thing than we are at another thing. And so while it might be logical that they not do this and that they do this, we're actually better at this or like it better. And so we end up delegating other things. And so that's the other piece, is it's up to every CEO, I think, to figure out what it is they don't have to do, what they absolutely have to do, and then what's in the middle that they can kind of go either way on. But it is a lot of work. And if you're in a fundraising activity, I mean, I'm sure you all find when you're in annual appeal season, or if you're in a campaign for your parish, that the priest is going to do a lot more fundraising than they're going to do when you're not in a fundraising mode, a real, campaign mode, and when it's more every day. So that's true of any organization, but it's probably especially true in a parish, that you're not going to spend time in fundraising. So again, this is more of the nonprofit model than it is a parish model, and you have to think about how it fits with your particular organization. I think there are definitely some roles for staff in no matter what model you've got, and delegation. And any CEO tries to do it all is probably doomed to failure, because they're not engaging enough people, plus they're going to wear themselves out. I don't know, some of you other ones who are involved in parish work might have other opinions.
We get back to that capital campaign, our parish, half the fund, and I do see where you're coming from, the pastor, half the fund for those of us who are going out, $44,000.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would literally track, track that, so that we can back to the parish, follow up in ways that we would not have, or follow up on the district standpoint. So, family members passed away. So I won't argue the pastor being a busy point, but I will tell you that the capital community is done a certain way, and really met really returns from the there's person on that really part of it. There's an opportunity to watch those without the excuse of a letter to go. Does that make sense?
So you went out there, you you ultimately went out there with more, uh, more observing their life, their work, and then we were trying to relay that back to specific ministries.
It was a real opportunity to modify life, because there's a confidentiality component to that too. But at the same time, where's people who want to be heard? And so to have that letter go out with the follow-up of a visit, opened that door of communication with more personal constituents, which God is our parishioners. And I gotta tell you, because I had that to all over the line, it took a lot of time, but it really did help us engage our parishioners on a level that we would not otherwise be able to do. So this was how you look at it. Some parishioners shy away because they didn't want to ask for money. Then there were others of us who said, you know, this is a great opportunity to get to know that person who listens to you on a different level. And by engaging them, you're getting them hopefully to buy into the parish and by the process and then support through the freedom.
And I think that that engagement of getting to know people, and I'm sort of repeating this for the online folks too, getting to know people and in a totally different way, in a deeper way, is a part of real advancement work, along with asking for money. I mean, if you really are doing advancement in the way that is most effective, you almost don't even have to ask for money, because people are saying, tell me what I can do, because you've engaged with them enough that they understand what you're trying to accomplish as a parish in this case, and they want to help. And you know, sometimes they may not yet see themselves as wanting to help as much as you'd like them to want to help, and that may be what the conversation is about, but it becomes less about, I need to ask you for money, and more about, let's talk about how you can make an impact. And that, in a way, to me, is a ministry, because you're allowing those people to help with something that's bigger than they are, and you're part of the conduit. So it's part of the work. It's not all of the ministry work by any means, but even if you're not in a parish, I still look at a lot of what we do in advancement as real ministry, because we engage with people to do something that they'd never otherwise be able to do. I always say that in one of the religious congregations that I work with, they do a lot of ministry with really, really poor people in India. And I can promise you there's no way in heck I'm ever going to go there and do that, because I don't like to be hot and I don't like to be dirty. And I just know that about myself. So, but I think it's great that somebody's helping them. So I'm happy to help finance it, but I don't want to do it, you know? And so they're helping me do something much better than I could ever do. But I'm not actually doing it. And so I think that's part of what we get to do in advancement, is help people accomplish things that they would never be able to dream of doing or never want to do themselves, but they like having it done. She's laughing at me because I don't want to be hot and dirty. Other things, any other comments about what we've been talking about? Also want to talk about then the board responsibilities in this area of advancing the institution, particularly in fundraising. We've talked about the board approving and embracing strategic vision, but it also involves getting down to the specific funding priorities. You know, it's important for board members to understand what it is you're going to take for you to achieve that vision, and what those priorities are specifically, and what they cost. You know, it's never, I've never seen a strategic plan yet that didn't have some kind of financial impact on an institution, because if you were happy with everything you were doing now, you probably wouldn't have much of a goal for your strategic plan. And so there's almost always some kind of financial impact, whether it's programmatic or facilities or whatever. And so this process of figuring out what those funding priorities are and engaging the board with them is an important role for the board to be doing, but it's got to be supported by the staff too in providing that information. The other thing that the board really has to look at is to make sure you have the appropriate resources to do your fundraising. And all too often, I see institutions that are poorly funded in advancement, and therefore they tend to be poorly staffed because you can't afford to hire someone with experience. And so nobody at the institution has enough experience to mentor the person you hired without experience. And so you end up with not enough resources, and it kind of becomes a vicious cycle. And so as a board, the board has to look at what kind of resources do we need and what kind of resources can we reasonably afford in order to have the kind of advancement program that will make an impact on our institution. And I do think you have to look at it as an investment, not necessarily just an expense, although obviously you will spend money. It's not free. People tend not to work for free. They like eating. You know, it's funny how that goes. And you have to have resources for materials, for travel, for entertainment. But a well-funded, appropriately funded advancement program can make such an impact on an institution that it's really incumbent on the board to do what they can to make that happen. And so when you're looking at, you know, what should I be expecting from an investment in advancement for my institution, I tend to look at sort of what's the return on the dollar for investing. And if you're a small program who hasn't done a lot of work in advancement, it might cost you 35 to 40 cents to raise $1 the first few years, because you're building your donor base, you're building your awareness, you're building engagement with people. But as you begin to move into a more mature program, you're probably going to get down in the 18 to 26 cents on the dollar as a return on investment. And then if you're in a major capital campaign, the expenses might go even lower, because it doesn't cost any more to talk with someone about $1 million gift than it does to talk with someone about a $10,000 gift. And so while you're still using your individual resources, you're getting a bigger return. So the amount that it costs can certainly change over time, but it's important to put the kind of resources you need to get the money you want. You'll also find that the first year you might break even, the second year you might raise maybe twice what you invest, but by the third year, that's when you should start to be seeing better returns on your investment if you have not invested much at all. Gosh, I had another point I was going to make. I forgot. I'll come back to it when I remember. But it is just really important that you think thoughtfully about what it takes to raise money. I know the other point I was going to make. You can really underinvest in a program and never actually see much return. That's the other thing. You could say, well, we always make an investment in our advancement program, but it may be that you're sort of strangling the program. I had a client one time who I finally told them, I said, you know, you give the program just enough money to stay in business, but not enough money to really make an impact. They had a pretty large database of constituents, but they couldn't afford to mail to each person every year. So they were mailing to a third of them every year, which means there really was no consistent contact. When they did mail to people, about the only thing they got was a direct mail appeal. They didn't get any kinds of newsletters or anything to keep them in touch with the organization. And so it was almost as if they shouldn't be doing it. I sort of likened it to a person who is shipwrecked and they're in the lifeboat. They don't have any food and they're dying of thirst, and it rains about every third day, just enough to keep them alive, but not enough to give them the strength to row to shore, you know? And so as you look at how you fund your advancement program, I think you want to make sure that you're giving them enough to be able to do the job and to really get acquainted with and get the cultivation done for the people that are likely to give the money. And I think you'll see a return if you do that. So I think that's the board's responsibility, along with the CEO, to really look at that and see what it needs. I think the other role the board has, and I talked about this earlier, is that each of them needs to make a meaningful personal financial commitment. So every year you have an annual fund, an annual appeal, and every board member should make a gift to that. Periodically, you're going to have special projects or capital projects or endowment projects that you're going to be doing. And board members should be prepared to make a contribution to that as well. And then finally, board members should also be thinking about a planned gift for the institution, whether that's a piece of a bequest through their estate plan, whether it's a contribution from their retirement account, a life insurance policy. There are any number of things that board members can do to remember the institution through a planned gift. And I really believe that that is another important thing that board members have to think about in the way they support the institution. We also look for board members to open doors. We hope that they will introduce us to their friends, perhaps host an event at their home, maybe host an event at their country club or their office so that they can get to know our institution. And then we also hope that they will help us identify people that are gift prospects that might be able to make a major impact on our institution and help us cultivate those people in a one-on-one way. And in some cases, help ask them for a gift. I know that not everyone has as much fun asking people for money as I do, but I keep telling people it's the best thing out there. It's so much fun to get people excited about supporting something they really believe in, but that's okay. If they don't want to have all that fun, I'm happy to do it, but we often want them to help us get in the door so that we can talk to folks and maybe they want to come along while we're doing the asking. So board members can have a real significant role in identifying and cultivating those prospective donors. Can really make a difference. And then I think the board members have a responsibility to monitor the progress of the advancement program, whether it's the annual campaign, the capital campaign you're doing, but to know whether you're being successful and to ask questions if it's not as successful as you think it should be. So you may need to provide board members with information about what's the history of our annual fundraising and how do we compare this year to other years. How do we compare to other institutions like us? What are the norms that we should be looking at as we consider how much annual fundraising we can do, how much of a capital campaign we can raise? You know, what are the parameters that would be realistic for us, but also inspire us to reach a little? And I think those are very legitimate questions for board members to be asking about advancement programs. And then there are other volunteers that are involved in fundraising. Some of them may be board members who are taking specific fundraising roles. Some may be people who are not on the board. Maybe they're an annual fund chair, a campaign committee, and they're the ones who stand up in front of your constituents and say, this fundraising effort is worthwhile. I believe it's important. I believe it's necessary to our institution, and that I really want it to happen. And so they become kind of the public face of a fundraising effort. And again, sometimes it's a board member, sometimes it's a board member paired with a non-board member. But it's really important to have those volunteers who make gifts and who are willing to stand up and say, I'm supporting this, I believe it's important, I believe everyone else should think it's important too. They're also going to provide leadership in helping you organize other volunteers to get out and talk with people, ask for gifts. When you were doing the parish fundraising, were you doing it as a volunteer? Yeah, and you want people who get as excited as she did about going out and making the visits. You're trying to make it real. It's a real process, but it can also be a fun process. You get to know people you didn't know well. You get to know more about what they're interested in. You get to have substantive conversations with people who are committed to the same organization that you are. It really is a fun activity. Although a little challenging, calling people to get an appointment, even if they're willing, finding a time that everyone's available becomes a challenge. Finding a time that they will answer the phone to find out if everyone's available can become a challenge. And if you were to ask most advancement officers, what is the biggest issue in getting appointments with prospective donors, I would guess that most of them would say getting them to answer the phone, because we're all so busy. So there are definitely ways that volunteers can help with that, because they often can get folks to talk to them that may perhaps avoid the institutional people a little more diligently than they avoid their friends. So the volunteers can make a big impact on that as well. Certainly, we look at fundraising volunteers to make leadership level gifts. Those leadership level gifts are, at the top range of whatever you're looking for in your campaign. In annual fund, it might be $5,000, $10,000, $25,000. In campaigns, it might be $100,000, $500,000, million, $5 million, whatever your campaign is aimed toward. But those leadership folks are usually the ones making bigger gifts to kick things off. They're also the people that are appearing at public events, speaking on behalf of the campaign for your institution, talking about what a difference it's going to make. And so they are part of that public face of the campaign, along with the CEO and perhaps the advancement director. And the volunteers are helpful in participating in all the different phases of getting ready for a campaign, because, we talked a lot this morning about how you identify board members and how you get them interested in what you're trying to accomplish. The same process is what you're trying to do in fundraising as well, as finding who are the people who have the capacity to make a difference in our organization. How do we find them, and how do we engage them with us? And yes, some of them may already be engaged as your constituents, but you may not realize that they have capacity, or you may not realize how actually interested they are. And volunteers can help you with that by knowing these people better than you do, by having fingers in different parts of the community than you have. And so it really just kind of expands your reach. And particularly for small advancement offices, I think working with volunteers is imperative. I just don't know any way that you can do your job and not work with volunteers, to be honest, because we just don't have the reach that we'd like to have. I can remember when I was working at the elementary school, we were a two-person office when I was lucky, and other times we were a one-person office. And we did do a small capital campaign, and it would never have happened if I hadn't had volunteers who were willing to go out and make calls, because I just didn't have the capacity to do all that and keep the annual fund running and keep the magazine going out and. So volunteers can definitely expand your reach in that advancement area. And many of them come from the board, many of them go to the board. It's a wonderful way to develop future board members, or to engage past board members, again, with your institution. So when I'm looking at the sort of triangle of fundraising success, you've got the board, the president, advancement, and other volunteers. I mean, that's the critical group that's going to make a difference for your institution. When you think about who's responsible for fundraising success, the board's not responsible for raising the money, but they are responsible for ensuring that the goal is reached. I mean, ultimately, I think it has to go back to the board, team of the board and the CEO, because that's where the leadership of the institution is. And so there is a strong responsibility for the fundraising program in the board. So I'm going to give you 3 thoughts about board engagement in fundraising. Number 1 is that board giving really does matter. One of the questions that foundations will ask is, how many members are on your board? How many members have given this year? How much money have they given? How many have given to this project? And how much money have the members given to the project that you're asking about? And just despite what I said earlier about foundations not being such a large part of what you're going to be getting, these are also the questions that individuals are asking. Who else is giving to this project? How much have they given? Does this make a difference to other people? And so having that board leadership in making your first gifts, making early gifts, that can help make a difference in being successful. And so that board giving really does matter. People are going to pay attention to it. And so you can have your board members saying, oh, nobody cares what I give, or other people saying, we don't really care. In the long run, people want to know that the group that voted to move ahead with this also put their money behind it, and that they really agreed, wanted it bad enough to put their own fundraising behind it. The second thing is, I think board members matter because people give through institutions on things they believe in by giving to people they trust. So you've heard probably that people give to people, and that's certainly true. But people give to people to support institutions they're interested in. They will use the relationship that you have or that board members have as a conduit for learning and understanding about the institution, but they're also going to be trusting that that relationship that they have is telling them that this institution is worthy of support, and they're going to see that by the board members also making their gift and by making the connection. So it's not how you ask, it's not whether you say, will you consider a gift of, or would you give, or even, horribly enough, we've got you down for. I think it's not so much how you ask, it's who's doing the asking and how they trust that person and the relationship they see that person has to the institution. And part of the reason I believe this is because I was working at a prep school for a little while, and it had been an all-male school, so we had a bunch of young men making, like 30-ish, making phone calls to their colleagues to ask for their gifts. And they would call up and they'd say, hey, Dave, how you doing? It's Joe. Hey, listen, we're having the phone-a-thon. I got you down for $100. Is that all right? And I'm thinking that is the worst ask I've ever heard in my life. And yet they were getting money because they're talking to people that know them. They're talking to people who trust them, and then they're doing a process that the people are comfortable with. Would I recommend that as the way you run your phone-a-thon ask? Absolutely not. Did it work? Yes, because of the people who were calling the other people. Had I done that, they would have been completely insulted because they didn't know me and they would have hung up. So it does matter who the people are and how they're doing the asking. It perhaps could be better done than that, however. And then my third idea for board members to think about is you can't get milk from a cow by sending it a letter. So if you want to get more milk, you've got to have more contact. Not that I want to call our donors cows, mind you, but it's about getting personally connected to people is how you're going to have the best results in your fundraising. So, on the continuum of connection, it's email, snail mail, phone calls, and personal visits. The personal visits are the most intimate, the most effective, and then downward from there. Important process to think about, yes.
Do you have any strategies now that there's caller ID?
There's lots of different strategies. One is to have somebody call who they know, and so they see that as the number. One is to send an email or a letter ahead of time to say who's going to be calling and why you're going to call. It actually works pretty well for people that are really interested. If they're really not interested, it might be a guarantee that they'll never answer. But if they're not interested, you may never get through. It may be that you set up the conversation when you see them in person, like especially in a parish. You may see the person at Mass or at another meeting, and you say, look, I've been trying to give you a call. What's a good time for me to reach you? And then, you can set up that way without having to have the conversation right then, because maybe it's in a public place and it would be awkward, but you might be able to say, I'm trying to reach you. What's a good time? There's no one size fits all for every person. Sometimes it's about calling at the right place or the right time of day. There are some people who prefer to be called at work, and there are some people who prefer never to be called at work. And you don't know that until you try it, really.
And that's in your look at this. You go on here, you can't get milk. You have to help replant. You have to help bring them back to the point where they're in. And so I think my church, we get more fruit, we get more milk from that. Helping them back. Come back to the
Mm-hmm.
etc. Than we do trying to.
And not to belabor an image of the dry cow, but it is a really important one, which is you can't get money from somebody who doesn't have money. And a lot of times we have wonderful people who love our institutions and will do anything they can, but they don't have enough money to make a gift. And to spend time trying to get money from people who don't have any money it's not effective. And so that's part of why we have to do the identification and to find, and again, I don't want to sound insulting like I'm calling all our donors cows, but we have to find the people who have the capacity and work with them. It's not that those other people are not valuable people and that they don't have something to offer. It's that they don't have money to offer. And so we do have to spend our time with the people that can make a difference. And sometimes that's a real challenge in an organization that really sees itself as open to everyone and loving everyone equally. We can still love them equally and we can still be open to it, but everyone doesn't have the same financial capacity. And so we have to find the people who have capacity and talk with them because they're the ones who can make a difference.
Based on my experience, I've found that often the most generous people are the ones that don't show their wealth. You know, so many times we have these like sessions where we're deciding who our big givers are. It's like, oh, the Johnsons have the $500,000 house, and one drives a Beamer, and the other one drives a Mercedes. We should just hit them up for a gift, and it's not usually the ones that are the most generous, even if they have the capacity. So those personal visits and that cultivation really helps you understand.
That is so true. Appearances can be very deceiving. I've met people, again, I go back to the time I was working in the elementary school. There was a family there. They drove each of them drove the most expensive Mercedes that was available. They lived in a house that was one of the most expensive in Washington, D.C. neighborhood, which is already expensive to start with. Of course, the two kids were in private school, mine. And the mother didn't work. The father had a job as a CEO of an association. And, you know, by all accounts, you'd think, wow, they ought to be giving us lots of money. But then when I really started figuring it out, I thought, she doesn't work. He works for an association. That's a nonprofit. And even though it's not nonprofit quite in the same way as a charity, it's not a corporation. And I started figuring out what their monthly expenses must be. And I'm thinking, they don't have any money to give. They're living it. They're not giving it. And so, you know, there are definitely families who make that decision. That's certainly their decision. But you can't always tell what family is going to be the biggest givers by how they look, how they act, or what they own. Some of it can be a giveaway. You know, if they're a billionaire, you have a pretty good idea they might have some spare cash. But others, they have plenty of money because they've never left the house they first bought when they got married. They drive their cars until they drive into the ground, and they have spare money, and they're charitable, and they want to share it. So appearances can be deceiving.
And another conversation real quick that I had with somebody is the difference between income and wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has a strong income that has wealth that has the ability.
Well, the difference between income and wealth is true, and it's not only that someone who has income may be spending it all. They may not be spending it all, and they may be willing to give you a gift, but it's going to be a different level of gift than someone who has accumulated wealth. Very different. And you look at people who, for instance, are in a profession versus people who maybe have been entrepreneurs or owned a business. They're going to have vastly different capacities because you may get paid well in a profession, but you don't accumulate a lot of assets as a result of that profession. So unless you've been frugal and invested, you're not going to have the assets, but you might be able to make $10,000 gifts every year, but you're not going to be the $1 million donor. And we often get caught up in trappings and not really thinking about who could have that ability. Plus, it also depends on where a person is in their sort of life cycle. Are they in the stage where they're still accumulating assets, supporting families, or are they in this stage where they're ready to dispense with some of those assets as they don't need to support their families anymore and they're prepared for retirement? So we are in various stages of life, and we can't all necessarily make the same level of gifts depending on where we are. And so part of our process in thinking about who to ask for significant gifts is to talk through what that person, where they might be in their life cycle, where they might be in their capacity to give, where they are in their interest level in our organization. We can work on someone's propensity, as I like to think about it, but I cannot work on their capacity that they have. So I want to talk to the people who have capacity and work on their propensity, not talk to the people who don't have capacity, because I can work on propensity till I'm blue in the face and I'm not going to get a big gift because they don't have it, as lovely and interested as they may be. And so that's the challenge of advancement, because there's no like database that I can just go automatically check and say, this person is rich, this person is not rich. Some of that information is there and some of it is not. So it has to be an accumulation of getting to know people, getting to know their interests. And there could certainly be people who are vastly wealthy who will never give you a gift because they're not interested as much as you may work on it. So putting the best resources you have together to think about who will make a difference to you involves using volunteers, using board members, using your CEO, and using your staff. All those together make a great team to help to really build the capacity for your institution. So how can you ensure that your institution is successful? First of all, you've got to think about it as being the joy of giving, that fundraising is not a chore. It's an opportunity that you're able to give to people to help make something really wonderful happen. I think that we often forget and we feel like we're picking people's pockets. Oh, that was almost too much of a tongue twister for me. We're not reaching in there and trying to take something that people don't want to give away. What we're really trying to do is inspire people to want to give something because they want to help make something better that they could never otherwise do. And if we think of it as an inspirational career, we're going to be a lot more effective than if we think of it as something that we're picking people's pockets. So the first thing I'd say is that all of us, whatever our roles are in this room, we have to know the case for support for our institution. What are the top 3 reasons why someone should support your institution? Somebody give me one. Why should I give money to one of your institutions? Yes. Catholic school without a parish to support you. Okay, I'm going to tell you guys. I think maybe you need to go think about your case for support. Why should someone make a gift to you? Why will it make a difference if they give you a gift? Come on, Father, I bet there's a good reason. And how do you do that?
By giving them an education they can't otherwise, so they have more opportunities to enter college. Really better the life of the people on their own.
I mean, I think, being prepared to answer that kind of question for any of us is important. Yeah.
100% graduate in 19.
As compared to the rest of the city of Omaha. Yeah. I mean, I think putting that perspective in too it's obviously it's wonderful that everybody graduates, but then when you compare it to what the city level of graduation rate might be, it's probably even more wonderful when you look at it that way. Yeah. So knowing what are reasons that your constituents would want to support your institution, and if somebody says, I'm really interested in what you do, tell me why it's important, you've got an answer. What is it that we're doing that resonates with people that will encourage them to want to make a gift to your school. I can't remember, Mike and Shannon, I'll ask you, but I remember when I was here before that you all had some great statistics about Catholic schools in Omaha and how you were doing so much better than many other dioceses with their Catholic schools. maybe you could shoot me those statistics. Maybe you don't remember off the top of your head what I'm talking about. No, it was really just the fact that I know it was the growth in enrollment. You were one of the few archdioceses that had a growth in enrollment in Catholic schools. Most of the others were seeing a decline, to a serious decline. And that's something right there to say, if you're asking why should someone invest in Catholic schools, because they're needed, they're vital. Our enrollment is growing, people care about it, people want to be part of our school system. It's a value to them. So I think those kinds of things are what you're going to want to use when people say, why should I? What is it you do? How can I make a difference with you? But knowing that, and you never know who you're going to meet. It's interesting. We had a client who was the president of a university, and he was on an airplane. He ended up getting bumped up to first class. He's sitting next to a guy, and then we're flying back to the town where the university is. And the guy next to him said, "So what do you do?" And he said, "Well, I'm president of this university." And he started talking about it. And the guy said, "Well, I'm really intrigued. I'd love to hear more about it. Will you give me a call sometime in the next couple of weeks?" And so he did, and the guy got really intrigued. He ended up joining the board. He ended up giving him $1 million. And he lived in the area, but otherwise he didn't have any connection. And it was really because that president was ready when somebody said, "Tell me about your institution. What is it that makes it great?" He knew what made it great, and he was able to talk about it. So I'm not going to tell you that you're going to run into somebody who's going to give you $1 million, but I will tell you might run into somebody who could get interested and make a difference. We talked about ensuring the board support. One of the things that I would tell you is not to be afraid to talk about philanthropic leadership to your board. Not to feel like asking them for their gifts is a sort of a dirty word or a dirty topic. You should talk about philanthropic leadership at your board meetings. It should be questions and comments and thoughts that they're having is, where do we fit in the philanthropic leadership of our institution? I would want to engage my board members in the process of discovering donors, of helping to cultivate them, asking, and stewardship. That's what I want to keep the board members thinking about as we move forward in the advancement relationship with the board. Then another interesting thing to think about is no one ever listened themselves out of a gift, but plenty of people have talked themselves out of a gift. So when you are talking to folks, when board members, other volunteers are talking to people that might be interested in supporting your institution, there's a lot of listening to be done. I think that probably goes back to your parish experience too, is you get more out of the listening that you're doing with people than you do out of the talking at them that you're probably likely to do. We spend so much time thinking about what am I going to tell people when I go visit them, and not enough time talking about what are we going to ask people when I go visit them. Asking them what's important to them about our institution. How did you get involved with our institution? What are your philanthropic priorities for your family? How does your family make decisions about giving? These are kinds of questions that could be really, really valuable to you. And it shows that you have a true and sincere interest in the person that you're talking to about your institution. So really thinking through how you're going to engage with people and not be so much about talking and doing a whole lot more about listening. I can tell you from personal experience of watching in horror, as a colleague and I were calling on campaign donor when I was still working in a university, or at Campaign Prospect. And he was a young up-and-comer, this was 25 years ago, at the Bank of America. He was a senior vice president, and we wanted to ask him for a $25,000 gift. And the Bank of America at that point had a very generous matching program, and they would have matched it dollar for dollar, so it would have been a $50,000 gift. And so we go in, and the plan was to ask for the $25,000. And so my colleague, who was also at that time my boss, which made it even more annoying, said to him, would you consider a $25,000 gift? And he's thinking, because of course this is the first time he has ever heard that question. He hasn't been practicing it for a few days or thinking about it for a few weeks. And so he doesn't say anything right away. And I'll be darned if my boss didn't say, oh, you could use your matching gift. And so we just lost $25,000 right there. Boom, talking. So he says, sure, I'll give you 12.5. And so we got our 25,000, but we lost our other 25,000. So you have to be so clear that you don't talk until you let other people talk. Listening is really important. And I have absolutely no doubt that he would have given 25,000 if we kept our mouth shut, but we gave him an easy way to get out of it. So you can talk yourself out of a gift, but it is hard to listen your way out of a gift. So remember that board members have roles in annual giving, campaigns, endowment, planned giving. They have a lot of role in building the philanthropic culture at your institution. They do a lot to create momentum. They help to keep people informed. Their enthusiasm among your constituents is absolutely contagious. And so keeping board members excited and involved and visibly in front of your community as excited and involved, I think is as important sometimes to success in advancement as it is the actual even gifts that they give, because they're demonstrating their leadership. Board members really need to understand the advancement process and the results that you're getting, or perhaps the results you're not getting and what might be standing in your way. Sometimes you're not getting results because people need more details on the information that you're offering them for projects. You can say that I want to build a new school building, but if you don't have any information about how much it's going to cost and what it's going to look like, it's probably not going to be as effective as if you can give them detailed drawings and ideas about what the building's going to do for you and what it's going to look like. So the board can help make those things get more realistic. And we talked about the board making a gift. The other thing that board members can do for you is to be at functions and help work the room. You often probably have gatherings, whether it's for parish members or parents or grandparents or whatever it might be at your schools or other organizations here, and having a board member there to interact with people can help to augment the staff, to help to get to know people. They can help you engage people in ways that you just can't do with a small staff. So having them be at events, even having them host an event, if they can host a small dinner party or cocktail party in their home, that gives you a chance to get to know some of the people they know in a way that you might not otherwise be able to do. It's a little bit better environment, more conducive for friendly conversation when they're in the home of someone who is their friend, and yet they're also representing your institution while they're doing this. And so many of those can be very, very successful. Make sure that your board can tell your story. Make sure they know the story that you want told, because they're going to tell a story. Anytime anyone asks, are you on the board? What does your institution do? What do you want them to say? You know, do you want them to say, we're a Catholic high school, we have 1,100 students? Or do you want them to say, you know, we're a Catholic high school in a poorer part of town, and part of our mission is to make sure that everybody who wants a Catholic education can get one. You know, those are totally different stories that you're telling. And so what is the story that you want your board members to tell, and how do you prepare them to tell it? Because hopefully they're happy and they're going to talk about being on the board. And if they're not happy, they're going to tell another whole story that we're not going to like. But what story do we want them to talk about? How do we want them to speak about our institution and what we're accomplishing? Boards create momentum. I mean, that is really part of your, I think, responsibility in helping your boards create momentum, but it's also a key thing that will happen when the board is doing their work properly. And so if you don't feel like there's momentum coming from your board, or that you're not feeling the excitement, the challenge even that boards might present to you, then you probably have some issues, because good boards are pushing the staff and helping the staff and making the institution better and making it better in a way that everybody gets excited about it. So you want to use that to help you better carry out your mission, to help you with your funding and your budget decisions, making sure you're spending the money in the right places, because there's very few institutions that have unlimited budget. Even Harvard would tell you that they could always use more money. And so it's about where do you spend the money and how do you spend the money. So the board creates momentum in that way. They need to keep their eye on the annual fund because often that's the pulse of the community. When giving starts to go down, that means that perhaps there's issues brewing, or perhaps the issue may be in the advancement office and how they're doing their job. But anytime that you see the fundraising fluctuate in an unusual way, there's something that probably needs to be reviewed, because either there are issues in the constituency or issues internally that you need to be working on. You want to think about whether board members, for instance, might be able to give you challenge gifts. That's another way that board members create momentum, is they would put up some potential gift if a certain condition is met. So, for instance, when Shannon was at Marion and we were involved there, one of the board members was willing to put up a challenge for the phone-a-thon. And so he would give up to $10,000 for any new or increased gift that was committed during the phone-a-thon. And I'm pretty sure the first year that raised you an additional $38,000. And so that's a pretty nice challenge gift that actually isn't that big. It doesn't have to be $250,000, it doesn't have to be $1 million. Even a smaller amount can make a significant impact. And the reason it could raise $38,000 is that people didn't have time to pay the gifts before the phone-a-thon ended, so we could keep advertising the challenge because it didn't take effect until it was paid. So that was a pretty good deal. And frankly, I've used that with other clients over and over again. I mean, the beauty of annual fund challenges is that they really don't get old. The school where I worked, we had a parent challenge. We had 95% or better parent participation every year. A board member gave us $5,000 that would be receivable when we reached 95% participation. And because we did it every year, it was easy to keep people doing it, and we could have that same $5,000 every single year, and it was amazing. And it wasn't, it's not that much money, but it kept people moving toward a goal. And it kept us moving toward a goal because we wanted to collect that $5,000. So challenge gifts from board members can be a really great way to help create momentum. The better your board, the better your institution. So whatever you can do to make your board successful, your institution is going to be more successful. And we can have a lot of other things on our minds with what we're doing in our program, what we might have to do if we're a school to recruit students, we're balancing the budget. But if we get a good board, they're going to help with every one of those things that we're trying to accomplish. And that good board is going to make the difference to the success of the institution. And I do truly believe that. I've seen it too many times with particularly schools that our firm has worked with, when I've watched them go from not bad, sort of mediocre, to really, really great institutions. It's had almost everything to do with getting people involved and interested and engaged on the board, which then brought other constituents in, which brought funds in, which brought students in. And so that strong board engagement makes all the difference. It really does. And I think I've run out of things to say, Shannon. I'm a little early, but any other comments or questions that y'all might have? Sure. It's through the board. It depends on your type of board. If you're a self-perpetuating, well, it depends on the board. If you're a self-perpetuating board, then the board chooses itself. If you're an advisory committee, then it's frequently chosen by the CEO or staff members at the institution. So it depends on the kind of board that it is. But typically governing boards are self-perpetuating, and so they elect new people as old people roll off.
But if they don't exist,
How does it get started? Typically, the way a board gets started is someone creates typically at nonprofit institutions, boards get started when the institution gets started, if they're governing boards, because that's how the institution is formed. And so it starts with the formation of the charter and getting the nonprofit certification, and the board is formed through bylaws then. So it's a group of people who want it to happen. If it's an advisory committee, then it tends to be started with a CEO process. Yeah. Other questions that y'all would have? Yes.
You were kind enough to say that you might have some sample job descriptions that you share.
I will.
Is it fair to ask you whether you have any sample board evaluation?
I do. Yeah. Remind me, Kara, wherever you are, or Shannon. Yeah. Remind me to do board evaluation and job descriptions. I'll send you. You can also Google a bunch of this stuff that might even be more applicable to a parish. Yeah, but yeah. We have a form that we worked with that is both the board evaluation and the self-evaluation of the board member. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I think if you want to make it clear to a board member what the financial expectation is, that you explain that before, as you're asking them to be on the board. You know, we are inviting you, Margaret, to be on our board, and we want you to understand that here are the things we ask of our board members. We ask you to attend meetings. We ask you to read materials. We ask that you agree to make an annual fund contribution, and when we have campaigns, understand that we'll be asking you for a campaign contribution as well. We ask you to always speak positively about our institution, and you just have a list of things that are required for board members. And if that is not something, Margaret, that you feel comfortable about, then maybe this is not the right time for you to serve on our board, and you're just upfront about it. I think you really have to be, because what I do sympathize with is board members who got on a board and said, nobody ever told me I had to give any money. And that's not fair, you know, because some advisory groups are not about money, but some are. And if they are, you need to be upfront about it. It's a little bit like having kids come to private school to me, and then nobody ever told them they'd ever be asked for money. And so they worked really hard to budget for the tuition, and they had no idea that they'd be asked for an annual gift. And whereas the admissions people are all worried about, don't tell them that, they won't come. I think they're madder when you don't tell them than they are when you do. So I think being upfront about it is really critical. And as I said before, I'm not one to say you must give X amount of money. I'm going to tell you, you should give something that's meaningful to you. And what's meaningful to you this year might be different next year. You make more money, you have more expenses, whatever.
Get a situation where the institution that thinks their way, somebody goes, well, I don't like that, maybe the way things, I want to get on the board, so maybe they can change it.
You do find that happening if the rest of the institution is happy with the board. You don't want that person on, I mean, with the way it's going, you don't want that person on the board. And you really do need to find out, are people coming on your board because they have a personal agenda, or are they part of the, is that me? No. Anyway, or are they part of the institution, you know, looking at what's best for the institution? I mean, I'm not saying board members can't have opinions, but I will say that board members should not come on with a one item agenda. You know, this is a girls' school and I want it to be co-ed, so I'm going to get on that board and make it co-ed. You know, that's pretty clearly not headed for the mission, and maybe some other things that are less obvious, but yeah. And that's the kind of conversations you should be having with people ahead of time. And also, if you've had folks volunteering, that would have probably come out that they had this hidden agenda. even not even orientation, but if they're volunteering ahead of time, you know, on this committee or that committee, if they have a bias, it's going to show. You can't keep it back.
Your suggestion of the board challenging others, and that triggers a lot of possible ideas, even if it's not an amount.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, does anybody have any best practices or things that have worked for your end that we should pass them on? Like, I know having the teachers give 100%, whether no amount given, but, I mean, no amount specified, but 100% by the teacher shows commitment to that. I think that's a good advertising campaign, and having the parish council be 100% would be a great marketing
Mm-hmm.
thing. Are there other marketing things that have worked? Well, offertory or annual fund. If Sunday giving, I was talking to Ms. Case about the annual fund. Started for our first time, so I was wondering if anybody else had any tips of things that worked or marketing. What about this Sunday offertory?
Yeah. So the question was about the offertory. Are there ways that you can encourage council members to use their envelopes and be the example to the parish, or other ways to encourage other people to, use the envelopes provided to be more regular in the offertory? Any thoughts that you all have had about what would make people want to do that more? Is what I guess we're looking at. I think that personally, that's a lot about inspiration, how you inspire people to want to do it. And sometimes it's about the mission of the parish and what you're trying to accomplish. And sometimes it's helping them understand how the money's spent, without it, we would, and I don't like to do a negative thing, but I like to think about, because of it, we're able to do this. And the way I like to get at it is to say, without it, what would I have to cut? And then turn it around when I talk publicly and say, because of you and the gifts that you make, these are extra things we're able to do, or these are additional things, or these are enhancements, and help people to see how that makes a difference. Because sometimes it feels like it's just going into a pot that has an empty bottom, and you keep giving and you don't know what happens, and helping people see that you're able to do things you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Now, it's hard if you're not really doing anything other than balancing the budget and doing the basics, but even that, without your support, we're really going to have a problem doing what we need to do as a church. So, but as far, Margaret, as annual fund things, there are countless challenges you can do. Some of them are, about one group challenging another. It could be the parents of the lower school challenging the parents of the upper school. It could be about a gift. I was telling Shannon yesterday about one of my clients. They had a very rich alum who really wasn't giving them very much money, and we asked her what would make her willing to think about giving more money, and she said, I'd like to see more of the alums participating. And so they said, great, will you help us get more alums participating? And so she put up a $25,000 challenge grant for more participation, which right there was way more than she'd ever given before. So and again, it doesn't have to be 25,000. It might be 5,000. It might be 2,000. Whatever numbers feel good to you that make a difference and that make that person feel good. It could be the board collectively putting up a $5,000 challenge for, new money. If you give more than last year, we'll match that. If you didn't give last year and you give this year, we'll match that. Up to a certain amount. Various ways to do that. Other questions? Yes. Oh boy. How much time do you have?
Everything from that person late to the meeting where, and if you feel like they need to catch up, just read and then have reporting and it's accomplished to the people every couple months, and you have to remember who didn't come a couple of times. Now you don't see them after a year, and it's just it's kind of a combination of things that can happen. And oftentimes, what I see here as a outsider looking in is no one really wants to address the old. And then that continues to snowball. And what you find then are there people who are really committed or getting frustrated. And they're saying, you know what, this can't be taken seriously. I'm not going to commit it there. I'm going to go overboard. Yeah, that will be a little bit. Even though you're trying to be mean well, it does break some. So, yeah, it does break something. How do you manage that effectively? Whose role is it? And how long do you wait before you actually say, lay this out and it's not exactly.
So board dysfunction probably only gets worse the longer you let it go, from my experience. And so addressing things relatively early, I mean, I'm not saying that no one can make a mistake or that no one can miss a meeting, but how you respond to people who miss meetings, I think, is important. I would not be willing to waste everyone else's time in the room to go back and recap what one person missed because they were 20 minutes late. And that's the leader of the board who makes that happen or not happen. And so the board chair, president, whatever you call it, has to embrace the idea that the greater groups in time is more important than the person who was late. And that may be a conversation that the CEO has to have with them or the advancement person, but it's important to do that. Typically, the sort of enforcement of process to keep from having dysfunction comes from either the board chair, the CEO, or the committee on trustees. Those are the three that really look at that. And it's often great to have the committee do it because they can serve as a committee, and that while that one person who's the chair may say things, they have the weight of the committee behind them. Whereas the board chair may feel like they're kind of out on their own, just having to do it because that's their role, but they also have the power of being the board chair. And so I do think that if there are people that just aren't, even if they're not causing dysfunction in the rest of the board, but they're not functioning as a board member, they're taking up space. So I have a client right now, they had a guy that they thought he was going to be, a great board member. He's got a lot of capacity. He serves on other boards. He has good sense, all this good stuff. Well, it happened that he serves on the board of the University of Louisville, which, if anybody's been following their trials and tribulations, is a disaster. And that has taken up all of his time, and he didn't attend a single board meeting at my client last year. And so they said to him, maybe this is not a good time. And he said, I'm really sorry. I feel like I've got that under control now, and I will be there this year. And he's actually shown up to the board meeting so far this year. But they didn't have a conversation with him, and they were willing to confront him and say, much as we would value your opinion, we're not getting it anyway. And so if this is not a good time, maybe you should take a sabbatical and we'll put somebody else in and you can come back. And so sometimes that's the way you do it, is less to say, you're doing a terrible job, and more to say, maybe it's not the right time. Now, when they are doing a terrible job and they're disruptive, that is a challenge. And I find that boards are very reluctant to confront that. And what typically happens is those people just mysteriously don't get reelected for the next term. That's one of the ways you can handle it, is not just automatically put them up for reelection. So. Yeah.
People say, well, they're off in 6 months, so okay, so
how do I live for 6 months, right? Yeah. Because they're fed up. Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's really imperative that there be good boardsmanship for in order to make everyone's experience on the board good and to make it work for the institution. For those of you who are in schools, the National Association of Independent Schools has a really great board handbook for board members. All of a sudden I'm drawing a blank on what it's called, but it has a lot of these things addressed. And by sort of telling board members ahead of time that if you're not conforming to appropriate behavior, someone will be talking to you, then it's easier to go talk to them, you know? I mean, if you said, these are things that are important that we value as a board, and for those who might someday end up not showing up or not doing their homework or being disruptive, we will talk about it. You know, we will have conversations with you about it. I don't want to say confront you. That sounds, you know, adversarial, but yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, it was great to be with you. I appreciate those of you who stuck it out here in a windowless room on a sunny day. I mean, really, what a sacrifice. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to come to Omaha.